Welcome to APA's fifth town hall on COVID-19. My name is Billy Zadig, APA's Standards and Codes Administrator. Allow me to review a couple of housekeeping items before we start. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We ask that you utilize the chat box for Q&A segment of the session. While we attempt to respond to all questions submitted, should we run out of time, responses will be posted to APA's COVID-19 RAQ Recently Asked Questions webpage. We also remind participants to ensure their speaker volume levels are set to your comfort. Our speakers are gathered from across the continent, and as such, varying volumes will be present. Today's session will award professional continuing education credits as well as ISDs and AIA CLUs. For AIA certificates, please send me an email after the webinar at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @apa.org with your AIA member number. Our webinar recordings will be posted to APA's website later this afternoon. Additionally, you'll receive a follow-up email within 72 hours providing designated links to all webinar recordings as well as information on upcoming webinars and town halls. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Lander Medlin, APA's Executive Vice President, your moderator for today. Lander, take it away.
Welcome all attendees. We really appreciate your engagement in these town hall meetings as we further explore the impact of COVID-19 on all our facilities organizations. I'd like to thank both our regular participants and any new folks who decided to join us today. Now, our prior town halls have been recorded along with answers to all your questions. They're posted on the APA COVID-19 website resource center. It is constantly being updated, so please return regularly. And our town hall meetings do occur every Friday at this time with a different target and focus. Hint, next Friday is on financial realities. Ugh. Well, again, thanks for joining the dialogue. We really want your questions. So that's what makes this a rich conversation and the special community we share. So please post them at any time. We are so pleased that we have the opportunity for this town hall to have a collaborating partner. ACUHO-I stands for the Association of College and University Housing Officers International. So at this time, I am thrilled to introduce you to my good friend, colleague, and counterpart at ACUHO-I, Mary De Niro, their CEO and Executive Director. Mary, please welcome everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Lander, and welcome to everybody who is sitting in on this town hall. ACUHO-I and APA have had a very long and deep partnership. And you know, it makes sense because we all have really big buildings that we need to facilitate in the best interest of our students. And so welcome and thank you, Lander and the APA team for including ACUHO-I in these important discussions. You know, I think the word unprecedented has been used more times than any of us want to hear, and maybe it will be banned from the dictionary as we move forward, but we certainly are living in times that none of us ever could have anticipated. Certainly at the start of the new decade, I think all of us were thinking about being innovative in ways that were very different than we are being required to be innovative today, 4 months after the new decade has started. As we move along, I think that there is more opportunity between campus housing and facilities to think about breaking down whatever barriers may have been there. And I think there's less there than in other parts of the academy to really think about how we can do our work differently in service to our students. You know, like APA, ACUHO-I has a coronavirus resource page. We too are doing webinars. And I would just encourage you that when you see something from an APA webinar that you think might be of help to your campus housing folks that you send it to them so that they can join in the call and you both can hear it and then maybe debrief after it. And I'm going to encourage the ACUI members, when there's a topic that's particular to the APA members, that they also forward to it. I think it's a great time for us to, collaborate in new ways that we haven't thought of in the past, but equally so to use this time to innovate and to really think differently. Certainly, as we look ahead for the next few months, it is uncertain times. And as we look at finishing the academic year and the fiscal year and the calendar year, we're all going to be faced with some very tough decisions. But I'm confident in the members of APA and ACUI that if anybody can help steer the Academy through these uncharted waters, it's our members. We're built for these kinds of times, and I'm delighted to be on this webinar and to be a part of the partnership. Thank you, Lander.
Mary, thank you so much. You are spot on. Collaboration is key, and it must be in innovative and creative ways as we move forward. I want to thank you and your team at ACUI for your willingness to partner with us. Wow, over 15 years, right? Maybe 18 years on the ACUI APA Facilities Conference. That has been a game changer for all of us, educating both sides of the house of the needs and how important each is. So I want to thank you for that and thank your team. And in addition, your willingness to partner with us on this important topic and further setting the tone for this session today. Thank you again, Mary. Now, as part of my Monday morning message this past week, I said, people most definitely matter. Thinking differently and operating differently are now our new norm. Furthermore, the University of Arizona president aptly said, we are now adjusting from a sprint to a marathon. And that really does adequately address the feel. So that's why we chose this topic today and these four panelists to discuss their stories around the impact of COVID-19 on O&M requirements, residential facilities, and beyond. So here's the format for today's town hall. I'll provide a brief introduction to set the context, show you some preliminary results of our latest grounds landscaping survey in the form of an infographic, introduce our stellar team who will provide some opening or framing remarks, and then we'll get right to the Q&A, as I know you've got many questions to ask this exceptional panel. I'll then conclude with a call for images, some available resources, and some closing remarks. Well, I've opened each town hall with a compare and contrast of the coronavirus statistics. And I take a deep breath when I say this. Yesterday, April 16, the U.S. marked 670,000 cases and 33,000 deaths alone. Last week, it's exactly 1 week ago, there were 462,000 cases and 16,500 deaths. And the week before that, 242,000 cases and 5,850 deaths. I could go on, but when this started and we started doing these on March 5, there were 200 cases and 0 deaths. So you can see what's happening. We have been warned that we are far from the end of the effects of this insidious virus. So why do I keep doing this? It's to emphasize the need to think differently about what we do and how we do it. Let's go to that slide, Billy. The new normal is here to stay. 97% of the population remains under stay-at-home or shelter-at-home orders, and we are getting positive confirmation that social physical distancing is working. A dozen nurses posed at their hospital ICU station with signs saying, "We are at work to support you. You stay at home to support us." The same goes for our teams of essential workers that are on the campus on the front lines. They are at work supporting us, and we, for those of us that do work remotely, need to stay at home to support them. This cannot be stated too many times. So behave as if you have the virus. Individual actions can make a collective impact and flatten the curve. One final saying I heard last night, it's simple and to the point. Let's go to that side. Use your head, stop the spread. So why should we do all of this? The impact on the economy ought to be another motivator, as the other very unfortunate milestone we hit yesterday was 22 million people applied for unemployment benefits. Another sad but historic number. That's 13.5% of the US workforce, and it's continuing to grow. It's not over yet, but I'm telling you, we are all in this together. Mary said that as well. So as such, we are seeing a tremendous need and response to survey data and information from all of you that is forming new emerging practices. You asked, we're delivering. That occurred with construction, where we received over 700 respondents. And now I have the pleasure of giving you the preliminary results of the grounds landscaping operations survey. Already with over 800 responses and counting, it's located on the new website page titled COVID-19 Related Surveys and Responses, and it closes yet this evening at 10 p.m. So let's look at the infographic. On the left side of this graphic, you're going to see the responses to three questions suggesting how many have chosen to decrease, yep, I said decrease, the standards or APA levels of service for care. 57% said yes and 43% said no. So below that is recognition that most people are not getting health screening daily for groundskeepers. These are things like temperature checks and questionnaires. So it's mostly no at 80%. And finally, most states reporting shelter-in-place orders, 82% of those. And if there's a follow-up question, this is really important, is how they're handling things under this order. And we've asked if ground staff are considered essential. So let's, the middle part of this slide, the grayed out portions of the graphic. The circles represent staffing levels for grounds, total staffing, admin staffing, and staffing percentage for both delivery of softscape and hardscape services. Now, the far right-hand side of the graphic represents the type of services grounds crews are offering. It's a huge pick list where folks were to choose all that apply. And you'll see that the majority of people are not offering the full services they used to. They're doing a few key things like mowing, litter policing, trash pickup, trimming, and emergency support services. So remember, the survey remains open until 10 p.m. tonight, and we will update the graphic data and information. We'll provide a cogent survey of the responses and the associated detail for your review and individual organizational use. All of this will get posted by the middle of next week on the new COVID-19 related surveys and responses portion of our website. These are unprecedented times. And you just said it, Mary, and I just said it, and we hate saying it, but it's true. Although these headlines grip us and trigger a myriad of fears, we are in this together. So let us know how we can help you connect and further engage with your colleagues. This survey is one that the Ohio State University reached out to us to assist. We were happy to do so. Please don't hesitate to tell us how we can help, and we'll see if we can't respond as quickly as you are having to do on your campuses. This takes me to our panel today and the information and stories they have to tell us. Let's start first with Tanya Hughes. Tanya is the Associate Director for Building Services at the University of Florida. She has grown up in the industry, starting out as a custodial worker with 36 years under her belt. Besides her custodial team, she manages a dedicated pest control and maintenance team as well. She is a longtime member of the Akuho'ai APA Facilities Conference team. Now, Tanya is going to address the challenges of messaging the importance of our custodial staff as the essential employees on the front line of this virus on our campuses and reinforcing how valuable they are. Identify cleaning protocols, training needs, administrative controls, and as always, managing meaningful people practices. She may give us a tabletop suggestion as an exercise. Tanya?
Thank you, Lander. It's my pleasure to be with you all today. One of the things that we found was very, very critical for us was that our staff understood why we are essential And so we wanted to make sure that that message was loud and clear, and it was important for our staff to understand what that meant in this time of crisis. And so we dealt with all the fears, the uncertainties, the doubt, and we expressed sincere appreciation for the team that was going to make sure our residence halls were clean. And in my role as the associate director, I did not want to communicate this information through an email. We have over 126 employees, so it was important for me that I physically go out to each of my zones and explain why we were essential staff as non-essential staff vacated the campus. We had to be flexible with our staff who had children in school and how it was abundantly clear that they would not lose their job if they needed to take time to find safe childcare. We provided our team with a list of things to consider before the pandemic really increased, and we implored them to make sure that they had safe childcare plans as one of those key tips as the schools were closing. We met with staff in advance of our HR department preparing letters that all essential staff had to sign. Again, it was extremely important that we allow staff the time to vent, and we listened. We focused on putting into place administrative controls as it pertained to stressing social distancing and what that looked like specifically as we were meeting with our staff, and we had staff checking in and also asking them to social distance during breaks. We also talked about the importance of proper hand washing for 20 seconds, and we even trained staff on how to properly wash hands. We placed flyers in our break rooms and in our storage areas. We placed them in our bathrooms and also where we stored supplies. We felt it was necessary to remove any rumors that were out there about essential staff not being able to take time off or they would be fired. That was one of the big messages that I definitely went back out again to all of the staff, and I kind of stressed, if you need to take time off, please take time off. And so nobody was going to lose their job. We were aware of all of our team members that were 60 years of age and older, as the CDC had recommended that that age was kind of prevalent at that time and at greater risk. We also work with our HR department to identify our staff that were dealing with health issues, and so we made reassignments readily available for those team members. It was very, very important that our staff understand you matter to us. We did not withhold any communication from them. We shared the message as often as we had information to share. We did not keep our teams in the dark. And thank you, Lander, for sharing that wonderful article from the New York Times about they clean the buildings, workers are fleeing, but who's protecting them? Again, it's important that you have communication in place to address situations. We informed our staff where we had cases that were presumed but not confirmed. We explained to the team that students that were in that category had to self-quarantine off the campus. In our UF Village community areas, our residents that tested positive could self-quarantine in their units. And so again, you have to make sure the message is clear. We have a dedicated critical response team of volunteers, and each team member is comprised of our after-hours emergency on-call team. We met with them individually, informed them of what the task would entail. Any confirmed cases, we did not hesitate, that would be handled by an environmental cleaning company that specializes in this type of pandemic cleaning. We collaborated with our environmental health and safety team to provide training. They taught us how to don our PPE and how to doff, which is the removal of our PPE. We established a 6-day waiting period criteria, as we understood testing would take about 3 to 5 days. And so it was important that everyone on this team had the appropriate training. As far as cleaning protocols and supplies, we recognized that supplies that we needed for this pandemic were going quickly, and we needed to know what those supplies were on hand and adjust the quantity. So we collaborated with our house and supply warehouse to access that inventory as it related to gloves and masks and toilet paper, paper towels, hand sanitizer, and what does that approved cleaning chemical look like? We checked in with the EPA registry to make sure that our chemicals were on that list. It's vital, again, that the team is trained and that they understand the difference between cleaning and sanitizing and disinfecting. High-touch surfaces should always be done. It was never a question for us. We continued that process, again, making sure training was key. Our protocols remain the same except for our critical response team in those situations, and we met with that group to clarify those trainings. We continued our focus on cleaning. Even if we only had one resident in the building, it was important to ensure that the building was safe and clean. We collaborated with colleagues at other institutions, and as a result, we purchased 5 electrostatic cordless foggers, and those foggers help us provide that next level of disinfectant surfaces after areas had been cleaned. It's very helpful to consider this type of technology and to have the units on hand. They're cordless, they're lightweight, and again, training. We collaborated with our finance director to determine what budgetary impacts we would have as we were ordering supplies, and then we reduced it to ordering only what was absolutely necessary to get the job done. We also collaborated with Residence Life and Education to access rooms that were completely empty, partially full, or full, so we would have that list and ready to take care of those should the need arise. We worked with our facilities refuse team to increase trash pickup due to residents moving out, and we were not able to conduct our normal move-out process. The tabletop exercise that I would suggest and recommend is that we're looking at now, what is that hybrid plan? The future is uncertain right now, and we don't know what the plans are for the fall semester. So creating various staffing models to help us prepare and help you prepare in the event, should you have to talk about reduced work schedules, creating alternate work staffing patterns, and talking about the things that we don't want to talk about possibly dealing with layoffs and what does that look like. Start planning now, and hopefully you won't have to use that plan, but you will have the plan in place. And I would also offer to each of you to think about how your team is the front line. We talk a lot about healthcare workers, and they are extremely important in this time of crisis, but let us not lose sight of the custodial staff that is often the less thought about. And so use the approach to make your team feel important. Keep a pulse on the mental well-being of your staff because they are our lifeline. Our staff is a valuable resource, and we have invested the time, effort, and energy in making them feel important. No matter what happens, what we do every day is going to matter. Stay abreast of what your CDC, your local health department is suggesting throughout these times of uncertainty, and we will get through this together. Thank you for your time today.
Tanya, that was fantastic. I wrote down a couple of things as you were talking about it, that collaboration is key. It's Mary said it, I said it, and then you demonstrated it by collaborating with other departments on campus, ensuring they were engaged with your team, collaborating with other colleagues at other institutions to get some of their emerging practices. And that key point about training, it really sounded to me like the ways that you went about that and the process you followed helped reduce the fear of that transmission, and then in turn gave them confidence that they could do this. And that really demonstrated when we train our people, they feel valued. And boy, you did that in spades, Tanya. I was so pleased to hear that. And then the fact that you touched on the pulse of keeping a pulse on their mental well-being, because the fear is real. Grief of loss, all of these things are happening, and there's so many things happening in people's personal lives that we need to be attuned to. So really excited about what you had to say and your tabletop exercises as well. So let's go now to Roland, who's Raleigh Zumbrun. He's FM's Associate Director for Housing Facilities at the University of Virginia. Now, he has an extensive background that, Raleigh, I would love for you to tell them some of that outside of higher education, that you bring a wealth of experience to the University of Virginia. Now, Raleigh has played a critical hands-on leadership role in UVA's maintenance, custodial, facilities, and housing response to COVID-19 and will offer some excellent firsthand insights. Raleigh will discuss the importance of understanding critical operations workloading, associated personnel and resource requirements, necessary inventory assessments, and a few related topics concerning student housing and the challenges of providing opportunities for alternate uses of our properties. And, as always, the importance of properly working with our people. He may provide a tabletop suggestion as well. Raleigh?
Thanks, Lander. The past 6 weeks have been a unique learning experience. I'm excited to be part of the panel. I started my career, I guess, in residential construction and then went on to general contracting before moving over to a few different roles in university physical plant. So that's basically my background. Here at UVA, my team provides service to housing and residential life, 7,000 or so beds. But we're also part of a larger campus facilities management department, so we're really fortunate to have access to a wide array of resources. Our goal has been to prioritize safety for our staff, residents, and community, while also maintaining as much flexibility as possible so that we could respond to whatever became necessary in this situation, which has been highly dynamic. As I thought back over what we've been focusing on, it came down to a few major themes. First, we sought to understand as much as possible, obviously, about COVID-19 so that we could develop appropriate cleaning and disinfecting protocols based on the best information from sources like the CDC, as Tanya said. In terms of PPE, we stressed elimination of the hazard instead of protecting against it wherever possible. We enforced social distancing, determined wait times to allow for aerosol settling and viral die-off, and we developed specific guidance around appropriate use of PPE so that valuable healthcare grade resources like N95 respirators wouldn't be wasted performing low-risk tasks. The state of Virginia and UVA both created special leave types to enable self-isolation of staff members who were deemed by medical professionals to have had significant exposure to COVID. And we made sure all of our employees understood common symptoms, how to use best practices, and what our new processes were to protect themselves. FM is really fortunate to have a number of staff and engineers with healthcare and lab experience, and that's been really helpful to anticipate what will be coming around the corner as this situation has escalated. Second, understanding how our workload would be changing was very important. UVA's president announced the move to online courses on March 11th during our spring break here, and housing immediately notified residents in our undergraduate properties that only those with approved access needs would be able to access residence halls after May 18th. So that was basically those with a higher documented level of health risk, travel restrictions in place that would prevent them from returning home, or no other safe permanent residence available. That eventually drove our undergraduate occupancy down under 400, but graduate and staff apartment areas remain substantially occupied also, which means we have to figure out efficient ways to support approved occupants and maintain stewardship and code compliance, while at the same time limiting the number of essential personnel we're bringing to grounds under a statewide stay-at-home executive order. In addition to those normal duties, we needed to support many unanticipated needs, like verifying occupancy, inspecting vacant spaces to confirm buildings were in good shape to remain unoccupied for extended periods. Since many students never returned to their spaces following spring break, this initially meant closing windows, checking HVAC settings, checking for pets, and so forth. But eventually we were asked to remove trash, empty out and clean refrigerators, even pack up and move student possessions in a few cases. We found that often it was surprisingly difficult for staff to shift from routine work management processes and prioritization to an emergency as needed basis. Standard operating protocols like Apple Level 2 frequencies and our internal response time targets are so ingrained at our shop levels, it's hard to adjust for staff. It turned out that right-sizing workloads and reallocating staff to the degree needed took very specific and prescriptive direction. Even now, we're still looking at ways to utilize information, electronic access records, usage indicators like trash generation and consumables, to help optimize our staffing levels. Third, managing all of this change meant understanding our personnel and resources. In February, we started looking at continuity of operations planning, and by early March, we were examining our lists of essential personnel. The goal was to make sure that the group that was designated with snowstorms in mind was appropriate in light of the current situation. Once the university moved to altered operations and essential personnel only, we worked to limit the staff on grounds, but still enable as much telework productivity as possible, whether that meant setting up loaner laptops, updating access to systems, or allowing desk chairs to leave the office. Given that we're inherently a place-oriented organization, we haven't exactly been progressive related to adoption of telework processes in the past, but we've done our best to get staff up to speed on powerful tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. I'm actually optimistic about how that organizational growth may increase future productivity once we resume normal operations. In operations department itself, we recognized that maintaining routine personal contact with all staff was critical, both to keep employees up to date on changes, but also to maintain their morale and to understand what resources our department had available throughout a public health crisis. To do that, we created a simple reporting tool for all its supervisors to log daily contact with each of their employees. And we also created a large number of training plans and online resources to help keep staff engaged and move professional development forward. Separately, we thought about what staff might have transferable skills and past experience in healthcare or labs if needed, and also what shops might need additional training or PPE to perform their normal tasks in a COVID-19 environment. As managers, we understood that there would be a high need for communication, even more need for trust and clear expectations than normal. But even then, we should anticipate a heightened level of employee relations issues, and we should be prepared to proactively address them in accordance with our employment environment. And we talked about how we could support employees who might become ill, have someone in their immediate family impacted, or have to deal with unexpected dependent care responsibilities after K-12 schools were closed statewide on March 16th, like Tanya was mentioning. I have 2 children in elementary school myself, so I can personally relate to some of the challenges that can raise. We also discussed our contracted business partners, what capabilities are available, whether they were implementing similar processes and precautions to ours, and how we should manage their workload throughout the changing situation. The fourth big theme we focused on was understanding our buildings and space inventory. Our first priorities were ensuring physical security. We had a couple creative residents who didn't care to leave on time, and just safing up the buildings for an extended period of vacancy. But we also made sure we understood what activities were occurring in all of our areas across campus. That wasn't always necessarily in line with what the executive order recommended. In addition to knowing on a space-by-space basis which rooms had approved residents or resident possessions, we needed to identify and prepare for occupancy as many rooms as possible. Early on in the crisis, many possibilities were on the table, including consolidation of approved residents, creating safe spaces for persons under investigation to self-quarantine, housing healthcare support personnel, or even potentially utilizing our buildings for healthcare purposes. To prepare for all these possibilities, we gathered and updated our asset profiles. We updated the space status tracking tool that we originally developed for hoteling during summer conference season. And we confirmed all deficiency and project lists were current so that anyone making decisions about alternate usage of buildings would have the best information available. As the possibility of healthcare usage seemed less far-fetched, we evaluated our properties against public information for several COVID-19 acuity levels to help guide decision makers in the right direction, whether they were looking for isolation spaces, monitoring wards, or even temporary ICU setups. The Virginia Emergency Management Department actually toured several UVA facilities along with Army Corps of Engineer personnel in order to understand what options might be available in case emergency surge hospitals were needed. It no longer seems likely that any healthcare use will be necessary here, but it was good to be prepared ahead of time. I know in other areas of the country, academic and residential housing properties are definitely being used or considered for support. So if anyone is interested in more details or assistance, please let me know. The Corps of Engineers actually has a public document available called H2HC, which stands for Hotel or Dormitory to Healthcare Concept, that outlines the conversion process and gives some guidance about which building profiles are worth looking at based on layout, HVAC systems, emergency power availability, and other relevant factors. Currently at UVA, we're also looking at building systems and programs for a different reason. We want to minimize energy usage in unoccupied or partially occupied areas in order to save money and for environmental reasons. So we're adjusting ventilation, set points, and so forth. That pretty much takes me through the current situation from my side. As far as other items that may be worth additional discussion, though, going forward, I'd suggest, in addition to what Tanya has said, planning for a full student move out later this spring or summer, heightened need for institutional review of communication to residents, budgetary impact due to refunds of room and board, the capital program and project impact, hiring, and then, of course, implications for the possibility of ongoing low occupancy through summer and even fall. That's what I've got, Lander. Thank you.
Raleigh, that is really great, and you have given us so many of your experiences, plus these resources, and not just what's on the ground now, what you've been dealing with since this all started, but also how you are considering and thinking about planning for the future into the summer and the fall. I know UVA well as a place-based organization, so that really did have to be quite different. And residential facilities and the whole housing side had a whole other set of difficulties in terms of what I heard you say about dealing with, okay, go on break, and now guess what, don't come back. And how do you deal with that? Because I have heard other institutions literally took all the staff to each one of the rooms and packed all of the stuff and sent it. So it is a monumental task. And Chris Meds was right when he said, you were the man that I should have on this call. So thank you, Raleigh. Now I'm going to move to Derek Jackson. Derek has his PhD, as a matter of fact. He's the Associate Vice President for Student Life and Director of Housing and Dining Services at Kansas State University. He is also a member of the ACUI APA Facilities Conference team. Now you can see from Derek's title that he comes with an amazing array of duties and responsibilities over time, and he will bring much insight to us today. Derek plans to provide a framework for, I'll put in quotation marks, closing the doors, meaning shutting down auxiliary operations, and what he's done and done it safely. Important considerations for opening the doors, when and how. They're planning to do that in recovery. The concept of switching mindsets between those two critical needs, which is not easy. And as always, the importance of properly addressing the people side. He may give us a tabletop suggestion if he wants to. So to you, Derek.
Thank you. I appreciate all of the work that's been done. Raleigh and Tanya did a nice job of kind of laying out the groundwork and what's been going on. And I commend all of those, our staff are on the front lines, and that is the part we have to worry about every day is our facility staff, our custodial staff, our dining staff. I oversee our dining program as well here. We're in-house, and all of our staff are worried. They have concerns, and those are legitimate. And I think that's the part that we need to be continuously conscious of. And also, one of my staff members reminded me, even as we come back into what it will be a new normal, there's going to be a lot of anxiousness and anxiety amongst our students and our staff as we come back into some form of more normal activity on our university campuses, where there are people gathering, and so it's a legitimate, stressful situation. And the more we can do planning and communication, the better our staff are going to be. And part of my role here at K-State, I've been at K-State for about 30 years. I grew up in the housing and dining arena, and about 7 years ago, I started overseeing different auxiliary services. And so I oversee our rec center, our student union, our health center, our counseling center, and our child care, along with housing and dining. And, I think for the moment, one of the things to recognize is auxiliary services are taking what I would say a big fiscal blow here. A lot of our fee-based services, things that we generate revenue based off of services that we provide, have been, in a lot of ways crippled based on the stoppage of services and in many ways refunding monies. I know our campus, we refunded about 20% of our revenue back to our students for their lost prorated days for meals and room. We're still operating our dining center in a small way. We have a few students that are living with us, so we are still providing food service, but 90% of our staff, full-time staff, are at stay-at-home, stay safe kind of mode and not coming into work. One of the things that, as talk about closing the doors, one of our considerations, many of our considerations were focused on safety of our students, safety of our staff, and so we operated a move-out process that was very safe, considering the social distancing and measuring how many students could be safely in a space, working with those families. Our student union, our rec center, are still operating as far as our facility side of things, but there's no visitors into those spaces. So we're doing a little bit of work, trying to do some catch up, once again, monitoring social distancing. A lot of one-person teams wandering around buildings, doing a little bit of work that's essential. Our health center, we do have facility staff working there along with our health care providers, and we've minimized our services provided. We're really only doing essential services related to COVID-19 kind of activities where we're seeing students that are coming in. And unfortunately here at K-State, we've had approximately 50 students in quarantine. We've had a couple of cases here. We're on campus. And so every day is one of those days where you have to manage I guess the way people respond to things. And now that the switch is being flipped a little bit as we sort of become I'll say comfortable, but we're managing our day-to-day operations now. We've limited our services. Most of our staff are no longer here on campus. We're not receiving any kind of services, and requests for services are diminished greatly. But now we're needing to think about how do we open our buildings back up, and how do we open our services back up, and which services come online first. And one of the examples that I'll talk a little bit about is our child care. So we have about a 240 child care center that I oversee through our director there. And we began to look at the CDC and the Kansas Department of Health and Environmental Safety guidance, new guidance for COVID-19 care, and begin to build a template of how would we open up in a safe way as possible, and minimizing the cross-pollination of these little children. And so really isolating each room as one defined unit, and that teacher and those teachers in that room wouldn't interact with other teachers and wouldn't interact with other children. And so minimizing sort of the risk that's there. And that's part of the game here, is how much risk our universities and in a lot of ways our businesses and our government's going to be willing to take as we walk into sort of this new normal. The piece that's important to know is that some of these services, like in our childcare, as we bring employees back to work, having childcare is going to be a critical piece. And so as we ramp up following the guidance for cleaning and care, we've discussed having a dedicated cleaner for each one of those environments as well. So every classroom would have somebody that's dedicated to sanitizing continuously as we walk back into operation, giving faith to our operations and some technology as well. We're working with a company that provides an overarching aerosol kind of product that works continuously, and it comes out of the ICU unit kind of environment where there's a machine that projects out dry hydrogen peroxide out into the environment that gives a blanket coverage as well as the mechanical cleaning that happens on a readily basis. Part of this too is because of the budget hit that we've taken, every consideration that you have is also balanced with how can you afford to do this? And many of us are recognizing that how thinly our university budgets are managed. Our states, if we're a state school, your states have been over the last several decades decreasing the state aid, and the reliance upon tuition and fees has been much more placed on the students and families that are coming here. That every decision that you start making at this juncture as you think about opening becomes an equation of what's our expense, what can we do, how are we going to keep people safe, and what are the services that are going to be provided. I oversee our food service operation in our union as well as in our residential dining. We may have some concepts that we won't be able to open up because they're just not a safe concept. I mean, salad bars and those kind of things that you wouldn't, self-service is probably not going to be something that you're going to do right away. It may be a few months to a year or down the road even, that where you have considerations for bringing back online some of those things that are handled a lot. Even with technology is, in our dining centers that we use a biometric finger scan that a student touches every time. And so can we walk away from that technology and provide something that's different, that there's no touching involved as we open back up? You know, my associate director for our Residence Life program and I were discussing this morning, maybe you have to assign times for students to use, you know, a community bathroom, and that there's a process for cleaning up behind that student, so that way there is less risk, less potential contamination for our students as they work back into this fall, is where we're targeting. You know, I think the tabletop suggestion I have is playing out the game of how do you operate your facilities with your students and staff in a safe way in the future. And I think one of the things that's empowering is the engagement of your staff in this modeling that you look at and say, how would we clean the stairwells and the buttons and elevators? And talking to our, you know, we do our own elevator repair here. As we were working through our move out, we were able to minimize which elevators would go to which floors. And so we knew that if you were on the 9th floor, that elevator served the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. Maybe it minimized who was in which elevators. And so that's some of the thinking that a lot of your team will be able to provide as they look at solutions for bringing back our operations into business. So I appreciate this opportunity to be part of this panel, and I look forward to the questions and listening as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek. You know, I really loved that you talked about risk and how you're thinking about as you walk through the whole experience, and then what you're doing to plan is what is the risk, knowing that risk, and secondly, how you're managing through the pretty significant reductions in resources that you already experienced, and then with student enrollment, who knows what's going to happen, and dealing with the fears of students, faculty, and staff as they come back once you open the doors. I also really liked this idea of, well, as you open up the conversation, that you're actually empowering staff to actually think about it and give you, your whole team, on the ground perspectives and potential solutions that you would have never, ever thought about or seen or gotten if you hadn't done it that way. So very powerful, Derek. I really, really appreciate it. So now we're going to go to Andy, is Andrew Fike, but we call him Andy. He's the Associate Vice President for Sustainable Facilities Operations and Capital Planning, Swarthmore College, a small private liberal arts college in suburban Philadelphia. Andy has worked in higher education facilities management for 25 years after serving in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Andy, I did not know that. Andy has worked for both small liberal arts colleges and large research universities in the Midwest, New England, and the Mid-Atlantic. Now, Andy, among a number of other things, will emphasize the differences between a large university and a small 1,600 student liberal arts college, identify his approach via 3 phases of engagement in dealing with this, and as always, addressing the significant impact on our people. He'll provide a tabletop suggestion if he would like, and was the generator. He was the originator for me to think about tabletop suggestions, as he found one from last Friday's HR session, town hall, and used that the following Monday morning with his team. So Andy, please.
Thank you very much, Lander, and I will move rapidly through a few items just because they're, I don't want to be repetitive of what our colleagues have already stated. And I'll also talk a little bit about capital program, because at a small school, capital program is integrated, very integrated with facilities operations. So as Lander mentioned, Swarthmore College is located in suburban Philadelphia, 1,600 students, so quite a bit smaller than some of the other schools that have been featured today. We're Quaker founded in 1864. We're entirely residential. We've got about 1.75 million gross square feet of building space and 425 acres of land. And part of that land is the nationally renowned Scott Arboretum. It's quite a beautiful place. So with us, while our students were on spring break and the COVID crisis started to escalate, we extended our spring break for a week in order to provide time for planning. And during that time, we then told students not to come back to campus and that the rest of the semester would be taught remotely. So therefore, our residence halls are still full of all of our student belongings. And because of the statewide shelter-in-place order from our governor, we still have not been able to have students return to get the residence halls cleared out. We're down to 93 students remaining in residence here who either have no home and nowhere else to go, or from countries whose borders are closed. So after aggressive measures from our Office of Student Engagement, what some of you call Residence Life, that number came down to 93 from over 150. So we're now in what I'm calling our third phase of our COVID response here on campus, and that's planning, but I'll get to that. First, I want to talk about phase one. And so during phase one, which I call reacting, this was a time of uncertainty and fear in a rapidly evolving environment. So one of the things that the institution did first and foremost was to form a COVID task force. And that task force consisted of our president, our chief of staff, vice presidents of finance and administration, communications and student affairs, our wellness center leader, campus safety, inside legal counsel, human resources, our off-campus study program director, and our provost. They worked through a lot of questions that were just nuts and bolts right off the bat. Who is an essential employee for this crisis? What policies need to be put in place for work expectations and pay and exemptions? For how long should we pay faculty and staff? We decided at this point through May 31st, which is the end of our spring semester, what procedures have to be put in place so essential employees can safely perform work. How do we obtain and consolidate masks and other PPE and source disinfecting spray and wipes that were in short supply? And our environmental health and safety resources were a very important partner in that aspect. How do we effectively communicate with a remote workforce so everyone stays informed, including those without computer access and Wi-Fi? This is interesting for us because at a small school, especially one with Quaker roots, we're very collaborative, more of a matrix organization than a hierarchical one. So a lot of time information is usually shared with entire groups of people at one time, or shared just by conversation among people. So in this case, we're forced to use our hierarchy more and more in order to make sure that information filters through in a focused way, all the way down to every frontline employee. How do we inform and handle symptomatic people in the community and communicate while maintaining privacy requirements? This was a lot of work with our health center in order to guide our decision-making about how we would share information and maintain privacy. How do we reduce the number of students in residence? Is it safer to consolidate remaining students or keep them spread out? What we opted to do was go to somewhere in the middle with our residence life group, and that was to close residence halls that only had one or two more people in residence, move those into other residence halls, and keep people dispersed while still maintaining safety with not having people alone in a single residence hall or maybe two people in a whole residence hall. How do we get student belongings out of here? Where are people working who are still coming to campus to teach remotely from labs or care for plants and animals or perform essential functions? That way we can target our cleaning and sanitation to optimize energy savings. This was a really interesting exercise because we partnered with our institutional research group in order to form a survey that went out to all faculty and staff where they were asked about where they would be on campus, when and why. And that was all that information was then rolled up by institutional research and shared with us. So we've got a very succinct list of what spaces are occupied on campus and when, and can direct our resources in a very focused way. And where can we quarantine sick residents? How do we halt and secure major capital construction projects that had to stop? Pennsylvania has had a very strict moratorium on research that's not, or on construction that's not life-sustaining. So that took us into phase two. And phase two is what I'm calling sustaining, and that's where we really hit our stride. How many maintenance and grounds and environmental staff did we need in order to sustain essential operations? And I'll get to that. And how do we have to structure our workforce fairly so everyone who is able does their fair share? This fairness and equity is another very important value at a Quaker-founded institution. How do we structure shifts and work assignments to physically distance? For shifts, we moved into smaller groups for punch in and punch out, staggered break times and staggered work times and shift starts. And our maintenance operations, we realized that we needed a minimum of 3 people in at a time every day in order to conduct rounds of mechanical spaces, check basements after heavy rains to make sure we didn't have any flooding, and respond to reactive work orders that would come in. The number of work orders is relatively low, but the emphasis on rounds and checking spaces is high. We used to rely on campus safety to provide us feedback for that, a lot of that information during storms, but our campus safety group is flat out. They have had some people that are not eligible to work just because of being in risk categories, so they don't have any discretionary time in order to support us with rounds or checking spaces. We realized that we needed 2 grounds personnel as a minimum in order to police for hazards on campus and keep storm drains clear. Our campus grounds remained open. After closing them, we decided to open them and maintain social distancing for people who are using the campus. I have to say that by and large, our community has been very respectful of that. We've been fortunate. We haven't had to disperse our own resources for mowing because all of our mowing is outsourced. For environmental services, we have 6 to 8 people on per shift, on 3 shifts in order to spread out. This certainly is not everybody, so they're on rotating schedules. They provide sanitation of spaces that are used. They support the dining operation for cleanliness, campus safety, and facilities building, which still has some activity, and handle trash and recycling. We have a pretty aggressive composting program, but the composting was suspended during these operations. We've had to get perishable food out of all residence halls and rooms. This was a heavy load for EVS, took about everybody for several days. One of my peers mentioned that already. In our capital planning and project management, most of that group was able to work remotely and come to the site sometimes in order to make coordinations. We also worked exclusively with our purchasing and accounts payable offices to set up virtual processes. So we now have moved into virtual signing of invoices in order to make sure vendors can still get paid. Virtual signing of subcontractor service agreements and contracts and purchase orders. Our business office established a specific COVID account suffix for all expenses and personnel expenses related to the COVID crisis so that we're prepared to roll those up if we're eligible for insurance or FEMA reimbursements as a result of this crisis. And for the contractors that are allowed to come to work to do emergency work or maintenance, we have required them to provide us a letter outlining their compliance plan to work within the CDC COVID safety measures. And that takes us to where we are now, phase 3, which I'm calling the planning phase. We moved into this phase last week. And what does that mean? It means that we're taking into consideration what does social distancing and market devaluation mean for the college in the short and long term. So in the short term, what measures do we have to put in place to close the operating budget deficit from our also refunding room and board to students, partial refunds of room and boards to students? To do that, we immediately canceled all travel, all professional development and catering, and reduced supply budgets for the remainder of the fiscal year. In facilities, we made sure that all buildings that were closed, which is just about all of them, are secure, and we've implemented very aggressive energy efficiency measures in order to reduce our utility expense for the rest of the year to try to refund some money back to the operating budget to close the gap. In our capital plan, we worked with our project managers to review the current capital plan for projects that were already funded, especially those that were funded and not started, to see if they're still a high priority, and if not, return those funds to the capital budget in order to fund other shortfalls or priorities. What about our summer construction that we had in the queue, and how should we plan for that? We set out early to make sure we maintained as much flexibility as we could to be ready if our governor lifted restrictions on construction, and that we would have resources aligned. We had applied for 4 waivers. So within our government, there was a process if you could apply for a waiver to continue work that was not life-sustaining. We applied for 4 for major construction projects. We've heard back for 2 of those, and we were turned down for those, and we're still waiting for answers for the other 2. So we could be in for a very quiet summer here with construction. For those projects that have not been denied waivers, we're continue to work with our construction partners to determine availability of resources and labor and materials, especially trying to get the status of long lead items that are critical for the start of projects. Working with our communications provost and vice president for student affairs about how we should communicate these changes in our construction plan to our broader community. There are going to be a lot of disappointed people that we're not able to move forward with some of the very important projects that we had in the queue for this summer. The long-term planning, I would say, is the most difficult at this point because it's the least clear and most emotionally draining. We formed a financial planning group, which consists of 4 of our board of managers members. Some of you might call these board of trustees. We call them managers, some of whom helped the college to manage through the 2008 economic downturn. So there's some good history there. Our president, our vice president for finance and provost, and 3 faculty members. And they're considering trying to bracket best and worst case scenarios for finance based on considering factors. No summer programs, loss of revenue there. No international students, loss of revenue there. No study abroad, that's actually an expense savings, but it'll put us in a housing pinch because we usually send 70 students abroad per semester. So we consider, should we under-enroll to keep residence hall open for quarantine? What if every student requires a single room and we can't double up or triple up anymore just because of separation? What if our endowment does not recover from a 25% economic downturn in the short term? What about distance learning in the fall if we can't have people here on campus? That means no room and board revenue. Can we charge full tuition for distance learning? Financial aid, we've already had some families reaching out to request an appeal of financial aid calculation because of change in income status. So considering all these factors is very daunting, but enables us to project a best and worst case scenario for our fiscal outlook. We're also reforecasting our budgets for the next fiscal year, starting with no increases, but looking at our fiscal 19 budget and modeling a 5% or 10% decrease in non-personnel expenses. What would that look like? What would we reduce or stop doing? Are there new initiatives that we wanted to do that are a higher priority than existing initiatives that we should stop? What about absorbing the costs of the new 150,000 gross square foot interdisciplinary science building we just opened with no additional funding? Can we model our utilities procurement opportunities to maximize energy market pricing savings? Just to name a few. And then our capital plan. This is a very interesting exercise. We usually submit a capital plan for a full fiscal year, but we're leaning towards submitting a capital plan for 6 months in May and then another one in September for the next 6 months, just because the market and the environment is changing so quickly. What's essential for the summer and what's essential for the fiscal year? But layered on this is the memory of the 2008 decision by our planning group that zeroed out the capital program for several years in order to avoid any layoffs at all, and the lasting impacts on accumulated deferred maintenance that we're still wrestling with as a result of that decision. What's absolutely necessary? In facilities operations, how do we prevent our domestic water systems from contamination, from stagnation? That's been an interesting question. And so we've decided to test in order to get some baseline readings and then set up a 6-week flushing schedule for buildings in order to make sure that we have some flow. And then we can test against the baseline before we open the buildings again. So what I suggest for a tabletop exercise is what Lander alluded to. I was struck by last week's HR suggestion about personnel contingency planning and thought, have we really thought through this right? What if a key member of our leadership team falls ill? And at a small college, what if a key member of our facilities team falls ill? We only have one locksmith. We only have 2 people that operate the billing automation system. We have 1 person that operates the work order desk. So how do we assess essential functions? Who does that work and who else can do it? Who can we assign to do it? Do they need training and instruction? Do we need to write down some instructions for these infrequent tasks? Who processes payroll? Who processes invoice? You get the idea. So we went through with each group this week. They worked through with their leadership team in order to determine what their essential functions were and who could do that. And the deadline was the end of the week, and we'll roll that up as a complete facilities department contingency plan so that we'll know who's going to take the controls if one of the key members of the operations falls ill. So first and foremost, I'd say that what's been important is to just keep reassuring the team that we're all going to get through this together and maintain a sense of humor. Thanks, Lander.
That's awesome, Andy. You did exactly. You really highlighted the differences between small and large schools, but also the similarities. You drew them out, and I think folks should recognize from everything you just told them that you have the same major responsibility areas as the larger schools with a lot lesser resources. Nobody really likes to hear that, but that really is quite the truth of the matter. And I really did like, as you were talking about the questions that you had laid out in your planning stage to develop your contingency plans and what you're doing with those to do best case, worst case, modeling for the fall, etc., and then how you use the tabletop exercise to consider those essential functions. That was really great. But I remember on our dry run call, you said that the 3rd phase of planning was scary as crap. And I'm going to say it because it really is, folks. Let's recognize that what he and all of you are in the middle of is really scary stuff. But it can take it down a notch if you start doing the things that Andy was talking about. So we've got a lot of really good questions. I'm going to do some quick ones, and then I'm going to do some ones that I would like all of the participants to speak to. First, Tanya, can you give us, you may not have this in your hot little hand, but the name of maybe you can shoot this to us afterwards so we can get it to everyone in our Q&A responses next week, the name and maker of the electrostatic fogger. That would be great to have. And then Tanya, can you talk about how you utilize the fogger in terms of the process that you implemented? Did you do all rooms or targeted rooms?
Thanks for the question, Lander. So the particular fogger that we've ordered is by a company called Victory Spray. And so I have pushed out that link and to one of the participants that had a question, and I also copied Suzanne on that. And so it is the Victory electrostatic foggers. And so one of the things that we found out through collaboration with some of our other partners at other institutions is that this is one of the pieces of equipment that got caught in the kind of slow trap, if you will, of ordering once this pandemic hit a high peak and everything was being prioritized to healthcare facilities. So the 5 foggers that we have on order are still out there and we're waiting on them to arrive. The goal for these foggers for us is that once we determine what we're going to have happen for the fall semester, once we have all of our residence halls clean, hopefully we will have those foggers. We're expecting arrival the end of this month or mid-May. We will have a team go through and clean all of the residence halls, the room spaces that we have available, and then we will get our team trained and we will have them go in and apply this particular technology as another way of disinfecting spaces throughout the residence halls.
Excellent. Thank you, Tanya. Derek, I do have one for you, and that's, are folks getting, are your folks getting lots of requests, and maybe the rest can chime in. But first, Derek, for sneeze guards as a prelude to reopening, and then I want you to maybe identify, and everybody could, are there other key precautionary measures you are engaged in right now? Derek, you want to take that one on initially?
Yeah, what's interesting about the sneeze guards is that the ones, we just built a new dining center about 4 years ago and have updated sneeze guards that have the ability to close almost completely down to where there's no room for a customer to reach their hand in. And we're actually in the middle of a renovation, you know, speaking of a capital project that has to move on because we already have a contract with the contractor. We were just reviewing the sneeze guards for the new dining center concept, and we made one of our dining management was like, we got to make sure that these sneeze guards come all the way down to keep people's hands out of there as we do new level of service on the going forward. So that was our answer for the sneeze guards.
Very good. Raleigh, I want to ask you, are there other precautionary measures that you are seeing that you really feel will be important as a prelude to reopening?
Well, to be honest, we had a conversation about PPE and face masks. We have the guidance that basically says if you're in public, then you should use source control, which is basically not a respirator, but having a mask on yourself if you're in close contact with someone, if a task means that you can't do it without working right next to someone. But the guidance we're relying on from the CDC says that for the most part, social distancing, that does not take the place of social distancing. For the most part, if you can plan work so that the hazard, which is people who might be infected, is not present, then that's better than any sort of PPE. So we're making appointments for service where we might normally just knock on the door and go in and do something when a resident requests minor service requests, that type of thing. We're really trying to maintain social distance at all time and minimize density.
Great, excellent. And so, Raleigh, let me ask you this, and I'll ask Andy to answer this too, if possible. And that is, as you close down spaces and buildings, what steps are you taking to prevent mold? That was one in particular somebody wanted to know about. Raleigh, and then maybe Andy. And yeah, as I said in the dry run, you can pass if you would like. Just let me know. Raleigh?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've got our eye on. Right now, we're kind of in shoulder season where we don't have usually a lot of moisture in the air. But as we move into summer, it'll be interesting to see whether or not a lot of our moisture load in our residence halls is due to the occupants themselves with towels and doors opening, things like that. But in the buildings that we have HVAC systems, especially with minimal ventilation, like PTACs, we're going to have to do some inspections, and we haven't really nailed down what the frequency needs to look like on that to avoid growth. In the summers, when we are occupied in between conferences, things like that, we usually make sure that we take periodic every 2-week inspections of all spaces so that we know how they're holding up. But this is a heightened situation where we've got so many student possessions still in unoccupied spaces.
Got it. Okay, Andy?
Thanks, Lander.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll answer that question too. This is very timely for us because I was just having this conversation with our energy services group yesterday, because while we're both trying to maximize our potential energy savings to close budget gaps with control of building up automation systems, we do know that we have some areas that are prone to mold or mildew with low airflow. And one of the other reasons it's very timely is that we just finished up a comprehensive deferred maintenance study where, in addition to just the facilities deficiencies, we went and interviewed every single building user group throughout the campus for the quality. I talked to them about quality of space, and a lot of the comments we got back was that group telling us where they see mold or mildew appear during the summer. And some of this we might not even know, because they would say, well, it gets on my books in my bookshelf because you guys slow down the airflow when we're not here in the summer, and I just clean it off when I get back. So we're fortunate to have a fairly comprehensive list at this point, probably more than we had before, and we will we'll maintain a minimum set point that we're ensuring that there's airflow through those specific spaces, and then they'll have to be checked. I do also just want to comment very quickly on your question about what other precautionary measures are taking place. I had mentioned that we're trying to get a count of just what our housing capacity is if we can't put more than one person in a residence room, but we're also making an assessment of our classrooms and labs in case we have to have some sort of distancing in pedagogy for when the campus opens back up. Can we open it up as normal, or does there have to be distancing? And then what is the true capacity of our classrooms and our labs for teaching compared to what it would be with the current capacities?
Excellent. That's really terrific. Andy, we did have someone who wants you to share your tabletop exercise as you described it in a Word document. So I'll be coming after you. All right.
Thanks for the additional work assignment.
Tabletop exercises are such a great idea. And each of you did such a wonderful job in that. So let me go to all of you. Are you hosting? I mean, it's really an interesting question. Are any institutions being asked to host drive-through testing in their parking lots? Tanya, do you know if that's happening at Florida?
It is not happening on our campus at this time.
Okay. Kansas State? Derek?
It was a question that came up. Our health center that's on the edge of campus is an old hospital that was converted into our student health center and counseling center. And it does have a drive-through kind of area that the county health department asked us about to host a drive-through clinic testing. That has not happened yet, but that was one of the requests.
Got it. Okay. Andy?
We have not, but it's probably worth mentioning in case anybody needs information out there that Temple University, my former employer here in Philadelphia, has set up their Leah Corus Center, which is their basketball arena, as a medical site, and they have their first COVID patients, I think, that moved in there yesterday. So, if there are any places that are, kind of behind this curve in Philadelphia and needing to set up, some of your larger spaces, that would be a good resources to go to at Temple to find out how they did this successfully in working with. I think they worked with the National Guard and the Corps of Engineers.
Very good. And Raleigh, I think that you sort of you alluded to that in your comments. Could you expand a little bit about some of the things you're seeing?
Well, we don't have anything active to my knowledge, but that was one of the things that we kind of thought about what as a possible need down the road a while back, and so we thought about how a couple of functions like that could be placed in certain areas, flow-wise, traffic, logistics. But I'm not aware, unless there's something on our health system side, of anything active right now.
Okay, very good. So Raleigh, let me take it to you. Did institution, well, Derek, I should ask you, did that? No, I already asked you that. And okay, good. Riley, let me go to you then. Did institutions, the institution pay for packing and shipping of any of the belongings that you had to deal with? Are you still dealing with all of them, or you know, what's the situation there? Are you planning to do so, or is it sort of still up in the air?
So I think that due to the impact, the obvious impact to students, that's being thought about really carefully. We've only, at this point, relocated or packed one-off students that either needed to be moved to vacate a couple properties entirely so that we had them available for contingencies, or a couple of students made special requests to Student Affairs and Housing and Residential Life that due to their circumstances, they wouldn't be able to return. And so they arranged for some items to be shipped or collected. But for the most part, my buildings still have a lot of possessions still in them from students that never returned to grounds after spring break.
Got it. Okay, so Tanya, I want to come to you. Can you expand on sort of the word used here was technique that used to get people to open up about the situation and feeling free to really open up, because you talked about that and someone immediately wanted to hear you know, what you did. Could you give us a few pointers there?
Sure. Again, there's 126 employees in my unit, and I reached back to my time as a custodial worker and how communication was maybe not shared as it is right now. And so when I arrived to meet with all of the staff, I could immediately see the fear and the concern and the doubt that was on all of my team's faces. And that's why I thought it was important for me to physically go to each of my zones. And so I allowed staff to hear me out. And then when I finished what I needed to talk to them about as far as essential staffing, I said to them, I'm not leaving until I can hear what your concerns are. If you don't want to talk to me in this group setting, I'm happy to give you my cell number. You can call me literally anytime. I don't care if it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. If you need to vent, you need to talk, you just simply want me to listen. That is my job. That is what I'm here for. And so as I began to kind of place that kind of, you know, guidance out there, I did have some staff that just reached out and called me on my cell phone and didn't want to just have conversation in the midst of their teams, but they felt more comfortable talking to me, just one-on-one. And I listened, and I didn't say anything. I just let them finish. And then now we can start to see just a little bit more calmness kind of coming over our team. And so I've been sending out quotes and just type of motivational things, and also asking staff to share what they have and to reach back on happier times before all of this started.
That's excellent. And someone had asked about tips and tricks for checking in on mental health and well-being, and what you just described creates that feeling of openness and that you're available. Any of my other panel members want to speak to that in terms of a few tips or tricks for checking in on mental health and well-being and getting people to open up with respect to the situation that they are engaged? Any of you? I'll do a free-for-all here.
Landa, one more note. For us at UF, we have a EAP, an employee assistance program. And so we also invited our team that didn't feel comfortable talking to me or talking to their superintendent, supervisor level positions to contact our employee assistance program, where they would be linked to a dedicated professional that could also help them through this time of crisis.
Excellent. That's terrific. Go ahead.
I'd like to add, Lander, that our supervisors are doing a terrific job of keeping engaged with all of the frontline workers. But there's a collection, I think, across the board. Some people are not at all concerned with this illness, and some are very scared. So we try to, with our leadership also, even though some of us can probably do our full jobs from home, having a little bit of presence every day is important, just because there's visibility, and it reassures people, I think, who might be scared, that we're all in this together, and that we will all get through it together. So I make sure that I write a memo that goes out to the entire facilities group once a week, just to check in with people, let people know what's going on, and also provide some reassurance. And then I would say down to our the least technologically savvy employee that we have in our facility operations now can at least call into Zoom on their phone, and the supervisors are making good use of having daily or at least every other day check-in meetings with their teams, even for those people who are in risk categories that are not working right now, to make sure that everybody stays engaged and is reminded that we're still here and there's still going to be a job to come back to when this passes.
That's excellent. So Derek, I wanted to ask you, have you anticipated any short-term renovations to reconfigure spaces that may not adequately support physical distancing or other sort of health and safety measures? Because you sort of run the gamut there of your responsibilities. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, like in the rec center, I was discussing with our director, we may remove some of the pieces of equipment that if you wanted to spread people out. So I think some of this is about what are you able to do quickly and with the staff that you have. I know in our health center, we created a different barrier, and we sort of the front entrance, if you're going to the right, you're sick. If you're going to the left, you go into we've done some renovations to do negative air machines in some of our treatment rooms to allow for, the COVID patients to be in there and our staff to have the proper PPE, but have pretty good confidence that patient and their germs are leaving through the exhaust versus staying in that room and transitioning down the hallways. Other than that, we haven't done a lot of, we looked at changing the entrances to our child care center to where parents would drop off their children directly to their room through their outside access from the playgrounds. We have also talked about in the playground on our child care centers, setting up some small barriers that, these are little kids, so they don't have to be very tall, but, a 3-foot barrier to divide off which playgrounds these children would be able to play in, to be able to manage who's touching what and for how long. So those are the sort of things that we've done so far.
Good. And Derek, can you follow that with what you're doing with respect to summer day camps, at least that right now?
Well, at the moment, we've canceled all summer activities for June and July. So no in-person activities. We are looking at a plan to do either a June 1 opening of our child care or July 1 opening of child care. Those would be earlier. We're talking about an August 1st reopening of our campus, basically sort of back to normal business as well as we can for a planning tool. But those are obviously arbitrary dates thrown out there in advance to hope and have some hope. And some of this is you've got to work through with our team. You've got to give them something to target and say, okay, what would a June 1st opening look like? What would a July 1st opening from a food service provider, from a dining? And some of this is about getting your inventories ready for startup again. I mean, we've throttled back all of our dining programs. So now we have to re-engage with suppliers to say, what kind of supplies do you have if we were to open up services in this window of time?
Very good. Could you chime in on that, Andy? On summer day camps?
Yeah, we unfortunately aren't making a decision on that until Monday. So we formed a group like we do for most things to discuss and provided recommendations, and there will be a decision forthcoming. So I cannot imagine that we will have any groups before July, but that decision has not yet been made.
Got it. Okay, that just tells you how fast that things are changing in hours, not even days, not weeks for sure. And a decision today doesn't mean it won't change tomorrow, right? I mean, that's the world we're living in. And Raleigh, do you have any student housing that's being used for health or first responder personnel. I did get that question from someone, and so I'm trying to check in on what is happening out there.
Not just at the moment. We did clear the handful of remaining approved residents from 3 different buildings that are all apartment style, actually 2 apartment style buildings and 1 more of a traditional hybrid, with the idea that we would have that flexibility then. Right now, I know leadership at UVA is keeping a close eye on a variety of models that are predicting our local peak here and forecasting whether that might be necessary. I don't think that, I think, like I said before, we really need to weigh the student impact of boxing all the remaining items up and the costs that would be associated with an exercise like that, with the benefit that might come from making it available to support personnel.
Very good. So I'm getting a question, and all of you may have some response to this, and that is about your suite style setups and whether you're looking at 1 student per room. Are you changing and reshaping the room use, occupancy, and the sharing of bathrooms and such? I mean, this gets complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Raleigh, you want to tackle that, or Derek, or Andy, or Tanya? Any of Raleigh, you want to start first?
Sure. We did look at the different use cases based on acuity level and who we would be housing. Right now, the handful of students that I mentioned that have been relocated to empty out certain buildings, those have all been placed in their own apartment so that they have their own space. But we also provided information for, I think, all of our buildings about which rooms, suites, apartments have their individual bathrooms to university leadership so that they can plan accordingly.
Very good.
One thing that we did, this is Derek. One of the things that we did is we did do consolidating down to just 1 building that's suites, and we gave every student a private room with a bathroom for now. We also preloaded into those rooms adequate cleaning supplies and instructions for those students to maintain their own space. So that way our staff at this point in time are not going in there on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to do cleaning behind the students in the restrooms. So that helped us. Down the road, we've talked through some of the variables, but we haven't made any decisions on what level of living our students would be in.
Very good. Anybody else?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hey, Leonard, this is Tanya. So we have just begun that kind of conversation as a hybrid plan about what that would look like in the future regarding our suites and our apartment style facilities. We also had canceled the weekly bathroom cleaning for our suites and apartments shortly after we got into a more in-depth crisis pandemic planning.
Got it. That's excellent. So we still have lots of questions as usual, which is wonderful. We got to as many as we could today, and I'm really so pleased that we had this panel today and the kinds of questions that all of you as participants asked. Thank you so much for doing that. We will get answers to all your questions. So let's look at a call for images. We are really seeking folks to get us images of COVID-19 and your engagement in it so that we can populate the website with that, and we will give you attribution. And you'll see on this slide that there are specifics, and we can send them to you if you'd like. We also have a resource slide with grounds, landscaping, survey link, which again closes tonight. So get your responses in so you can be included in the data analysis to support your colleagues. And then I have a save the date and next week's topic with my NACUBO and CABO, Canadian Association of University Business Officers colleagues, and a couple of SFOs will be talking about the financials, what the considerations are right now, what we're seeing in the summer, fall, thereafter, how it's a game changer, so you'll want to tune in. And finally, as you can readily surmise, the impact is unmistakably broad. We don't know what the world is going to look like. And although this is an ever-changing crisis, We must embrace flexibility, a willingness to quickly adapt and readapt, and focus time and attention on the implications to and scenarios for our institutional operations this coming academic year and thereafter. Yes, and I sigh, we are dealing with some very harsh realities. So during these hardships, I would strongly suggest that every day you decide to be intentional about looking people in the eye. It says you matter. Providing a word of encouragement. It says you matter. And giving a virtual touch. It says you matter. Our people matter. Let's show them how much we mean that by our compassion and calm in the chaos. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you next week as well. Thank you, panel, and thank you, Akuai. Goodbye.